UFC Saudi Arabia, Israel Adesanya versus Nasruddin Imavov face off in what is potentially a middleweight title eliminator. This is the Funk and Flex MMA preview and prediction show. Thank you for tuning in at whatever part of the day that you're tuning in at. Live every Wednesday at 8:30 for the preview and prediction shows. And then obviously you can watch it back whenever here at the Funk and Flex MMA YouTube channel. While you're here, drop a like, hit subscribe. Go ahead and follow me at Funk and Flex MMA on Instagram. And we're going to go ahead and jump right into this video. For the first fight of the night, we have a matchup between Hamdi Abdul-Wahab and Jamal Pogues. Abdul-Wahab making his UFC debut here. Technically, he's a 5-0 MMA record, but he is a former Olympic wrestler for Egypt. Jamal Pogues, the former light heavyweight, is now a couple fights settled into as a heavyweight, and I have not been too impressed with him. I think that this should be an easy win for Hamdi Abdul-Wahab to go 6-0, especially Jamal Pogues has not looked great off of his back. I think Pogues may be the better striker here, but with the wrestling background that Abdul-Wahab has, I think for an even money fight and a 5-0 record, I really like him to get this fight. Maybe even potentially a finish in the later rounds of it. And I'm sorry, it's not his UFC debut. I forgot he did fight against Dontel Mays, which he did take on 12 days' notice for his first fight in the UFC and won a split decision. So that has to stand for something as well. I did actually forget about that fight, but that nonetheless should support my pick a little bit more. We're gonna go with Hamdi to get a dub done on this one. Up next is Bogdan Grad versus Lucas Alexander. And for me, this one, guys, I'm gonna have to go Lucas Alexander. Training out of Fusion Excel. He is representing a couple of his other fighters before him on the card with Terrence McKinney, representing that gym out of Orlando. I do like that gym. The Brazilian fighter, not necessarily a traditional Brazilian background training. He is more of a kickboxing style, but I do like him to win this fight. Really, the question is if he's going to be able to stuff the takedowns for Bogdan Grad, who is making his UFC debut here. He does seem to have a well-rounded offensive takedown skill set, but I think that Lucas Alexander will be able to survive it, and I think that the UFC experience that he has in this fight should get him the victory. The impressive win over Steven Peterson was, that's something to say for itself. He's a veteran in the sport, and I think that Lucas looked really good against him. So go ahead and give me Lucas Alexander for the pick in the second fight. Up next, we have a matchup between Jasmine Jasdavicius and Mayra Bueno Silva. This is a tough one to pick for me and break down. I do like Jasmine Jasdavicius in this one. She is going to be the lean. However, Mayra Bueno Silva may be a problem for Jasdavicius as she does have some slick jiu-jitsu, and I do think she is the far better striker. However, Jasdavicius has just shown at 125 pounds, which is where this fight is taking place at, that she can control the pace and dominate the wrestling. I think that Jasdavicius is the pick for this. I don't expect it to be a finish. I think it's going to go the distance. And if she can keep it on the ground, I think that her wrestling will be able to overcome the jiu-jitsu that Mayra Buena Silva possesses. Even though she did go the distance with Raquel Pennington at 135 pounds, who's now the champion. She also fought girls like Holly Holm and Macy Chiasson. She has some good fights on her resume, but so does Jasdavicius, and I think a win over Miranda Maverick is better than a matchup over Mayra Buena Silva. So for that, I'm going as Jasdavicius as my pick. On to the next fight, Faraz Ziem versus Mike Davis. And this is the hardest fight to break down on the card for me. I know I said the last one's a good matchup too, but these matchmakers are really on fire for this card, guys, because this one's tough to pick. I do tend to lean Mike Davis to be the better skill set in MMA for this. That being said, an underdog for Aziam is looking like the best bet for me in this fight. However, I'm probably just going to watch this as a fan, and I'm going to go ahead and pick Faraz Ziam to continue the momentum, even though I think Mike Davis has the better skill set, and he's on some good momentum too. That's why it's really tough. But that knockout that he scored over Matt Favola really was world changing and career changing for Faraz Ziam. It was a highlight KO of the year candidate, and I think that momentum has him on top of the world. training out of Killcliff FC. Gilbert Burns, who's a really, UFC veteran. I don't need to, explain Gilbert Burns' UFC resume to you guys. He speaks very highly of Farazian, and I think that the striking is just going to be too much for Mike Davis. I think if Davis can get the fight to the ground, which I do think he has high fight IQ, and may be able to mix in some offensive wrestling and give Farazian a little bit of a problem. But I think that the bigger moments of the fight are going to be with the striking of Farazian, and that's why he's going to be the pick. Along, we have a matchup, is what I believe is the featured prelim on this card between Terrence McKinney and Damir Hadzovic. And this one, I'm not really sure with this card. There's been a couple fights canceled this week, so this is just the order that I got off of MMA Junkie. Shout out MMA Junkie, always keeping us up to date with the news. This is the order they provided. ESPN and UFC.com are almost never accurate, so I don't really trust them, as they had Balaji Oki still fighting this morning when I checked. So that being said, I apologize that this is a little out of order, but you can never really trust the order that you get with these UFC fights. So on to the breakdown. I believe Terrence McKinney is the clear favorite here. He's just a fighter that's been known to die on his shield, and unfortunately, that has got him caught a couple times early in fights. But he also catches people early in fights, and I think that he's really motivated, really changing the gym to Fusion Excel. Like I said, I have a lot of praise for that gym. I think they're an underrated, slept on gym, and I think that he is by far the better athlete between these two. When they match up, I think McKinney is gonna be better pretty much everywhere that this fight goes. When you have a fighter like Hadzovic, and how you may remember this guy is when Money Moicano tapped him out and submitted him in the first round. Moicano stood over him, like kind of taunting him, and Hadzovic got up and mad and wanted to fight. And when they said like they wanted to fight longer, Hadzovic said, "Well, you shouldn't have choked me out then." And that kind of mentality for a fighter, not only does it produce a viral reel that went everywhere and kind of made him the laughing stock of the UFC, it didn't really make his name viral, just his face. And I think Terrence McKinney is going to put this guy on what you would call the equivalent of a UFC poster here. I could see a finish early on from Terrence McKinney, and he's definitely going to be the pick in this fight. Up next in the first fight of the main card is Shamil Gaziev versus Thomas Peterson. And while I do think that Gaziev is going to be the pick here, I'm letting you guys know that I am probably going to have a bet on Thomas Peterson as an underdog, as Shamil Gaziev really struggled with the cardio of Jairzinho Rosenstruik, and Thomas Peterson has that wrestling cardio, and I think that he could definitely mix that in here for a plus 280 underdog, and I see that he's even growing a little bit. That's just too enticing of a bet for me, as Shamil Gaziev I think is extremely overrated. Um, However, I do see him having the better technical striking here, and if this does go to a decision, I could see him maybe doing enough in the first two rounds. However, I would not be surprised at all if Thomas Peterson gets a late finish here in the third round. So, for the pick's sake and the preview predictions, we're going to go Gaziev, but you'll see a different scenario here on the betting breakdown come Friday. Muhammad Naimov versus Khan Ofli in the next matchup on the main card. And I'm not going to waste much time on this one. Muhammad Naimov is the pick. I think he's the better MMA fighter everywhere. Khan Ofli 0-1 in his UFC experience. And I think that he's fighting a significantly better fighter. So this to me feels like a layup. It is kind of questionable why it's only minus 300 favorite. That being said, I think that Naimov is the better fighter, and I gotta stick with my instinct here and go with the OV fighter in Saudi Arabia. Give me my Muhammad Naimov. I think he can get it done here however he wants. Decision, KO, submission, none of it would surprise me. I'm probably just gonna go ahead and use him as a parlay piece here this week. But for the pick, you gotta go Muhammad Naimov on this one. Up next, we have a matchup between Saeed Nurmagomedov and Vinicius Oliveira. And I really so badly want to pick Vinicius Oliveira in this one, but I'm going to have to go Saeed Nurmagomedov. I do think that Oliveira against Bernardo Sopaj was kind of a scary moment in the second round where Sopaj dropped him. And I think that some refs could have called that as a finish there, as he was just pounding relentless ground and pound, and the round saved him. start the third round. We saw it ended up being a highlight of the year, KO of the year, another candidate for that for Vinicius Oliveira. But um, he did have a good performance against Ricky Simone too. Over here trying to talk myself into the pick still, but I think Saeed Nurmagomedov, just to note, is not related to the rest of the Nurmagomedov family, supposedly, or at least he doesn't train in their camp. I think that he is going to be the better overall fighter here, and I think that he has tricky submissions from the top. So I think that that's going to be a prop that I look at in this one. And for the pick's sake in Saudi Arabia, I'm going to stick to it and go Saeed Nurmagomedov as the pick, as I think that if this does go to the judges' scorecard, he's going to get the close fight lean, as I do think that this will be a close fight. On to the featured fight of the Saudi Arabia card, we have a matchup between Sergey Pavlovich and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And I think that this is a bounce back spot for Pavlovich. The matchup is kind of a scary matchup, though. I don't think the UFC gave him an easy layup, as Jairzinho Rozenstruik has really earned this matchup. Just the more technical, I think, is the higher IQ fighter. But as we saw against Francis Ngannou, when big, powerful shots are coming at him, especially with heavyweight, long 84-inch reach arms, when those strikes are coming at Rozenstruik, I don't think that he can eat them. I don't think that his defense is going to be good enough. And I think that he is going to try to outpace him and kind of jab his face off like Alexander Volkov did in the last fight. But I don't think that Rozenstruik's going to be able to execute it as flawlessly as Rozenstruik did, or as Volkov did. As They have Rozenstruik listed as a 6'2" fighter. He is just always looks far shorter than that compared to every other heavyweight that he's matched up against. Pavlovich looks on the big side of 6'3". I wouldn't be surprised if you see a 4 or 5 inch height difference in this fight. And that's really the problem that Volkov gave Pavlovich, was the jab and just keeping that distance. I don't think that Rozenstruik's going to be able to do that. And I do expect a first round KO here for Pavlovich if he wants it. Co-main event time. We have Shara Bullet Magomedov versus Michael Venom Page. And this is on paper a very good matchup. And I do think that it'll be a great fight. Fits the theme of the rest of the card. Kind of a tough one to break down. But at the end of the day, I'm going to go the Magomedov in Saudi Arabia. And more than that, I do think that the younger fighter here by 7 years has to be mentioned, as well as the fact that Michael Venom Page is fighting up a weight class here at 185, which he has done before in Bellator, but it's just nowhere near the same level of competition. As I just think Magomedov has this sixth sense, maybe almost like a daredevil like superpower with his one eye missing. And I think that he's just going to be able to land the sneakier, more powerful shots. And then also the fact that if it does go to a decision and it is a close fight, I think that he will get the judges' love here in Saudi Arabia. Not to feed too much into that conspiracy, but it is just overwhelming how big of a percentage that their fighters win, especially in close decisions, even sometimes when it looks like they've lost. So for that, give me Shara Magomedov to win this co-main event here in UFC Saudi Arabia. Moving on, Israel Adesanya versus Nasruddin Imavov, the main event of UFC Saudi Arabia. And I will be going against my last name ending in OV here, as he is the French OV. He may have some Russian ties, but I think Imavov is just a French last name. I'm going Israel Adesanya here. I do think that this is the matchup where you can buy him low and just fighting nothing but champions and top level competition. Um, I think that he looked very good against Dricus du Plessis, and a lot of people are going to say he quit, but it was in the fourth round, and a lot of people have trouble going into the championship rounds with Dricus, if they can even make it that far. So I'm going to go ahead and go Adesanya. I think he's going to have the cleaner striking from distance, and I don't want to buy into the momentum of Nasruddin Imavov. I think that he was losing that fight to Jared Cannonier, and while I don't want to really critique him too hard for what was questionably an early stoppage in that fight, I do think that if that fight continued to go on, that it would be going into the fifth round with kind of a even scorecard. And Israel Adesanya stunted all over Jared Cannonier in his prime. I think that Adesanya training with Robert Whitaker here which you know has been all over social media, really says that he's taken this phase of his career seriously, and I think that it's time to respect that. And at minus 160 odds, you know that I'm going to be all over that. So not only is he my pick for the card, but he is also probably going to be one of my most bet spots on this card. Um, that being said, that does wrap up this preview and prediction show. Not to give away too much of my betting breakdown coming out here on Friday. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you can see that. That'll be posted Friday at 8:30. You can watch live with us. Um, Other than that, I appreciate all of you guys here. If you don't mind, like I said, hit the subscribe button, drop a like. We got a great card here coming. It's just a morning fight night card to start us off on Saturday. But nonetheless, we got to get up, got to get excited for this because there's a lot of money to be made on this one. So I look forward to seeing y'all at the cash counter. And until next time, stay funky.